We've all heard a lot about gender and sexual expression, and you, Rob, have created the very first gender-free company in the world, named the Fluid Project.
That's right.
Right? And as a member of the LGBTQ+ community, has your sexual identity impacted your business, if at all?
Okay, so first let me start off by my pronouns are he, him. I am a cisgender man. For those who don't know, that means my sex sign of birth matches my identity. So I was born a boy and identify as a boy or a man. So let's start there. So I have been openly gay in a professional world most of my entire life, and been accepted and really done very well in traditional companies. That said, I acted the role. I passed as a straight guy. I wore a suit every day, talked about sports, and I acted in a way that was almost a bit inauthentic in who I really was. So I decided to pack up that part of my life and start my own career, which is the Fluid Project, which you mentioned, which is a place that I could be my authentic self and allow young people to also be their authentic selves as well. So that's the journey where I am right now, and it brought me here.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
That's beautiful. And we love to talk about gender norms here.
That's right.
So I would love to ask, how has society associated girls with pink and boys with blue, and what's the history behind it?
It's a very interesting question, and I'm going to answer that. So a little tee up. So we all know boys are blue and girls are pink. And what many of you don't know, which I didn't know until recently, was how this started. So I'm going to go first. Oh, there I am. There's me in a skirt. Here we go. Let's talk about pink. So pink originated in the mid-18th century, and it was a color that was brought to Paris, France, which was the fashion capital of the world. And it was done not as something around gender, but just done as aristocracy. So it was a color of aristocracy. So you see men and women alike wearing the color of pink. And it stayed that way for a few hundred years. It wasn't until the early 1900s in the United States that department stores in the US started coding baby clothes. And they started using pastels, and the pastels were light shades of pink and light shades of blue. And originally it was the thought that blue was prettier and pink was a derivative, a watered down version of red, and red was a color of power. And of course, at that time, power was male. So it started to move in that direction. Around the same time, World War II had happened, and a large number of men went off to fight the war, and women went in to fill their space. And as men came back, they wanted to reclaim their jobs, but there were women sitting at their desks and in their positions. So there was this interest to try to get women out of the workforce, and they needed an opportunity to do that. So in 1953, Mamie Eisenhower wore a pink dress to the inauguration. And it was a moment where marketers kind of jumped on it and captured that moment to say, women back in the kitchen at home and men back in the workforce. A few years later, this young girl was born. 60 years ago, Barbie became a definition of what we think girls should look like and look like, which is body dysphoria at its best. And the pinkification of America began. The color blue is decidedly less interesting because pink went off to girls, blue went to boys. I thought I'd share with you one of my favorite pictures from the Met. This is an impressionist and it's about 120 years old. And what's so interesting about this picture, for me anyways, I looked at the words and it was a mother with her son and her daughter. That in the late 1800s, up until early 1900s, boys wore dresses until they were about 7 years old, and they grew their hair long and then they cut it short. So this is still a very recent phenomenon. So that's the color of pink and blue, how it was born. Fast forward to the mid-80s when women could, or parents could find out the sex of their child through prenatal testing, and now baby showers took on a whole new life. And really, pink and blue started to get more extreme. So at this point, toys started to get more gendered, clothing more gendered. You start to see things like girls be about sparkles and about being pretty, and boys being about strong, adventurous with guns and trucks. And continue moving in the wrong direction. I think even if you look at social media right now with gender reveal parties, it's getting even more outrageous, where people are having gender reveal parties. And if you think about it, somebody jumping out of an airplane with a blue parachute to say it's a boy, or a pink confetti if it's a girl. What's so interesting about this is they're talking about the sex of their child. Your gender is your identity, and it's how you identify once you become an adult. So it's time to stop gender reveal parties and let young people figure out who they are and what their gender is when they grow up.
Right, and speaking of young people, I know you've thrown around this word a lot. So who is this Gen Z we hear a lot about, and what are their values?
Gen Z, let's talk about them. Anybody here Gen Z? It means you're 12 to 22 years old. I'm just gonna say thank you, because the world is a better place because of Gen Z. That we have found a generation that's bringing me hope again, and a lot of other adults as well. So this generation is large. It's a third of the world's population, 40% of the spending power by next year. So corporations have to wake up and understand what's important to Generation Z. It's the most multicultural, most diverse generation we've seen. It's, I call it Generation We, a generation that believes that there should be equality in race and gender, LGBTQ rights, religious rights, and a generation that believes that we should be taking care of our environment and our planet and not tormenting it anymore like we've done in the past. So I just want to say thank you to Generation Z. And it's time for us to think about gender and what gender represents to this generation. So Generation Z has, by the way, Generation Z hates labels, so I'm so sorry to keep calling you Generation Z. I'll just call you the young generation. This new generation that hates labels, and we won't call them anything anymore, has defined new words to describe what gender is to them. So there are new words, people identifying themselves as they, them, as non-binary. And about half of Generation Z, or your young generation, knows someone who has a pronoun other than he, him, or she, her. It's also a generation that's willing to cross over the lines and shop in an area other than the one denoted for them. So 60% of this young generation is willing to shop in an area other than the one, either male or female, assigned at their birth. And this generation just is giving more hope every single day. And it's time for companies to wake up and listen to them and what's important to them. You have to be totally transparent because this generation will find out what you're about and build a company based on values and principles, and you'll do really well in the future.
Great. So have retail companies changed to appeal to Generation Z, and have there been anything that remains unchanged?
Sure. There's a lot to consider. So I'm going to start off just thinking about how to create products. So first of all, this is going to take a lot of learning and unlearning when you're creating product for this new generation that sees gender as more fluid and the opportunities to exist in between the binary. One of the things that I encourage designers to do, or companies, is to design with inclusion. And what does that mean? To design with an inclusion meaning that all body shapes are not the same. We're seeing more and more talk about body positivity. There's also square bodies and round bodies. So designing with inclusiveness. The other thing is inclusivity is not just high designer price points, but knowing that young people don't have unlimited funds. So if you want to offer fashion, do it at an affordable price. And the other thing is to design with responsibility, social corporate responsibility. Know who's making your clothes, knowing where the factories are, and knowing what impact it's going to have on the planet. So those are the things that we need to focus on. One of the things that I thought was really interesting was the obvious things. So when you open up a store, the first thing you do is put in fixtures, and then I went to go find mannequins. And what I thought was fascinating was the mannequins have become more extreme. So the shoulders on the guys are this wide and the chest is this big. And when I looked at a female mannequin, the boobs were this big and the waist was this small. I thought, who the heck looks like that? And there were no mannequins that reflected the shape of America, the shape of gender. And so we created our own gender mannequins, free of gender. This was an adaptation of one, and I'm in the process of creating one that's more reflective of who our community is. And this is the world's first gender-free mannequin. There's a little work to do. I thought I was being completely open-minded and inclusive, and I got an email from someone that says, if you're really doing that, why are mannequins white? I was like, that's a great question. Time to fix that. So it's always about getting better, but really some good insight. Yeah.
Right, so then other than Fluid, have there been other companies that follow through with this, or?
Other companies have tried, and it's been an interesting process watching some companies have tried to create gender-free clothing. They usually end up being these shapeless, colorless things of loose pants, white tops, and I really don't know many people who dress like that. Most people want to be expressive in their dressing or some way reflect who they are, and colorless, shapeless clothes don't seem to reflect this young generation. It's about body positivity. It's about celebrating who you are, colors, words. So we're working really hard at my company to work on that. And I encourage, although there's been a lot of misses, a couple, I won't use names, but one company created gender-free clothing for kids, but it was all sweats and like animal prints or camel prints. And they really missed the mark because they missed the feminine expression. And most companies tend to lean more masculine, they go feminine.
Right, so like how does gender fluid fashion reflecting self-expression, how does it look like throughout the entire world?
So I travel a lot around the world, and just recently I was in Dubai. Before that I was in India. And I'm going to share a slide with you because it was an awakening. I started to see how men dress around the world. I'm like, wait a second, you're wearing a dress, you're wearing a skirt. So this is a kandora, which is you often see in the Middle East, a kurta, which is in India, a kilt, which is in Ireland, and a lungi, which one day I traded a young Indian boy my Nike shorts for a lungi. He was thrilled and I was excited too. But essentially what happened is you're seeing, men walking around for centuries in these essentially pieces that are functional because they're good for the weather climate, but also it's just accepted. And I hope that if we create a society where these men could walk down the street in a town in the Midwest in Pittsburgh and no one would look at them any differently than just as who they are and how they're expressing themselves.
Great. So with designers integrating their women's wear and men's wear lines, where do you see high fashion going in the future, especially in relation to gender?
Yep. More and more designers are designing with gender-free silhouettes. I get the opportunity, I get to work with schools like Parsons and the Fashion Institute of Technology, FIT, and more designers are moving into this gender-free space. They don't want to be locked in this binary male or female designs. So it's starting to happen there. The CFDA, which is the Council of Fashion Design in America, has created a new category for non-binary design. So there's male designers, female design winners, and now non-binary. So we're starting to see it happen more and more with designers. We start to see it in marketing, that designers are using more androgynous models. In the runway shows are merging. They're putting men's and women's designs together, and they're integrating with gender nonconforming models and trans models. So it's great to see it happen at the high-end price point. But for the rest of the world, it's got to be done at an accessible price point because we all can't afford $1,000 pieces. So it's got to be done at an accessible price point. So it will continue to happen. It will continue to filter down into, I think, mainstream as companies start to wake up and learn that this is not just a trend, but it's a movement and it's moving forward. But I think the accountability now is about us as humans until that happens, as a species, as a society, to think about clothing and how it reflects us. There's certainly clothing that reflects our way of how we want to be performance driven. So I'm going to run faster, I'm going to stay warmer or stay cooler, or my clothes go drier. Or is there the possibility that clothing can be protection and a shield protecting us from bullying and shame? In my case, passing as a heteronormative business guy in a corporate world. Or is there the opportunity that clothing could allow us to be self-expressive, to be whoever we want to be, and we could look at the person next to you and say, yeah, you look great. That's exactly who you want to be. And that we allow everyone to be their authentic selves. I mean, that's when fashion moves that way, that we'll be there standing and ready for it, and it can happen tomorrow.
Well, thank you. That's all the time we have for today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you.